Welcome everyone to the online lecture City of Changes by Ivan Kucina. Ivan was born in Belgrade, Serbia, lives now in Rome, Italy. He's a former studio master at DIA Hochschule Anhalt, Germany, where he ran research and design thesis studio and elective courses since 2013 until 2025. He previously worked at the Faculty of Architecture, University of Belgrade from 1996 as teaching assistant and from 2002 as an assistant professor. In 2009, he was a guest professor at the School of Design Strategies, Parsons, the New School of Design, New York. Besides, he was a visiting professor at KTH School of Architecture, Stockholm, German University of Technology, UPAD Department, Muscat, Oman, and Vietnamese German University, Ho Chi Minh City. During his teaching career, he developed and realized many collaborative studio projects and workshops with studios from TU Delft, Belgrade Institute, TU Wien, ETH Zurich, KTH Stockholm, Parsons, the New School of Design, Anhalt University of Applied Science, Polis University Tirana, Roma Tri University, Arch University Prague, Technion University Haifa, and University of Van Neighbors. His academic research focuses on sustainable transformation of the living environment for the future well-being and includes formal studies on informality and participatory design actions. In bridging his research pursuits with his teaching and practice, he has co-established and co-managed interdisciplinary teams such as Stifter Group, Rotterdam, Belgrade, School of Missing Studies, New York, Belgrade, and School of Urban Practices, Belgrade, to pursue a series of research and design projects in the endangered neighborhoods. In 2006, he co-founded and managed Belgrade International Architecture Week and served as its program director until 2018. From 2012 until 2016, he co-founded and managed urban transformation program at Mixa Festival, Belgrade. Ivan Kucina has been a practicing architect and used to run an interdisciplinary architecture and design practice in Belgrade from 2000 until 2014 with projects that range from urban design, building, spatial intervention, interior design, furniture, exhibition design, and graphic design.
Hello everyone, to the online lecture City of Changes by Ivan Kucina. I would like to thank you, Ivan, for accepting the invitation and for taking time to share your thoughts and your remarkable perspective and thoughts with us in my YouTube channel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hossein, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to meet you.
I want to just add one personal note that I would like to mention that you were my professor and thesis supervisor at the South Bauhaus. I truly appreciate how much you helped me to see architecture from a very different perspective, completely different perspective. Even during my thesis work, it was a very challenging time during the pandemic, but although we managed to keep the routine of weekly meetings and became like exploring new ideas and horizons during this time. I remember also that I kept working so hard during this semester break. I love the process. I love the guidance that I get from you. Really, I truly appreciate this opportunity to meet you and to be my professor for 1.5 years. So thank you so much again, Ivan, and welcome everyone to this lecture, City of Changes by Ivan Kucina. Thank you.
These words are my greatest reward, for everything I'm doing. When you read the CV, I remember how old I am. And in my head, I'm still young. I feel like I'm at the beginning again, so it's very strange with the life, how it goes, and how our memories reshape our experiences and our thinking about the future, always push us towards the changes, so we're almost never the same, although we believe we are the same. So it's a kind of very complex, and this is the lecture that I want to give now is about this complexity of life, which then reflects to the complexity of architecture itself. And that's why it seems strange when I teach that, because it's usually in architecture school, we avoid complexity. It's hard to wrap it in one semester, in 1 year. It's with the instruments that we usually used. So you need to reinvent the instruments. But these thoughts now that I have at the beginning are basically related to a book that I'm working on together with my ex-students, including yourself. And we'll talk about that probably once it gets published more. It will compile my experience from 12 years of Dessau teaching and works of some students whom I think really step out in the sense that they're playing at the edge of the future, you know, so of the future thinking. So for today, I choose to make you another kind of topic that could be introduction to that book, because also it includes some works of the students in it, but not in that kind of resumed way that I planned the book about. So let's start sharing the lecture. City of Changes. It's about complexity, I would say, of our living environment and the way how it changed by the time. It actually, in the beginning of architecture design and urban design, change was kind of neglected as a subject, because instead of it, architects look for the ideal, which is timeless. So based on the timelessness, they believed that they could actually create even urban schemes and house schemes that will last forever, and that guarantee certain kind of exception for the generation that will come. And this is one of the elementary principle of ideal city drawn by Vitruvius. We know he's the first architecture theoretician, in which you find the temple in the center and the street quarters with squares around it. A very centralized motive that actually survived for centuries as a model, as a role model that was then applied in many different places. And in Renaissance, it was revived as an absolute ideal city. This was Alberti drawing. And then it was copied, especially around Europe for another centuries. And you see there were some changes, because instead of the god in the center, they put the king in the castle and the fortress that was protecting from the enemy. And it could be next to the river. And more or less, that became a matrix that is still kind of usable when we think about planning the city. Then, at the beginning of 19th century, something drastically changed, because instead of these authorities that were set up in the center, suddenly the factory became the center point, and the workers' apartments were organized around it. And this is the Ledoux, the drawings and the show, the city that has been realized after that and then abandoned after some decades. And that actually triggered the whole idea about ideal city that would adapt to these new circumstances where industry is actually dictating the life organization. We have a garden city that appeared as a model, then industrial city, Tony Garnier. Then at the beginning of 20th century, Corbusier wrapped these two models and create Ville Radieuse, the functional city, which became a role model for the whole next 20th century. And then after the Second World War, there was satellite city as a model, and then recently the 15-minute city concept, and then the smart city concept, And then if you ask AI, what is the future ideal city, he gives you image, which is something like this, where you can see that the biomorphing and the artificial building is somehow merged into new concept that is still not existing. So what this quick overview tells us is that ideals are actually not timeless. They're changing by the time. And if ideals are not changing, then we are changing the interpretation of those ideals. And that means that basically the whole history of ideal city and typology that was drawn out from that knowledge is very questionable, at least. In practice, I will show you one of the case study, just to go further from the theory about ideal city. We witnessed, especially after the Second World War, the build of these modern cities, which took Corbusian scheme as a starting point and then adapted to their own environmental and political agendas. And you find these cities in socialist and in the capitalist world and in the non-alignment world and in the post-colonial world. So they become a global model of ideal city by the time. And here you can see one of these models, which is the scheme of New Belgrade, the new capital of Yugoslavia, that started to be built by the end of 50s. Next to the old city of Belgrade, and you can see the whole political leadership of that time following the chief of the Urban Planning Institute, who explained them the concept of this new city. And just very short information, it was planned to have a major axis, the center of it, to have a major axis which stretched from the railway station to the Palace of Federation. And in between, there are different squares, one dedicated to trade, another one to culture, and another one to public institutions. And then around that, you have another 6 squares which were dedicated to residences. So the whole thing would have about 50,000 people. And just, you know, it was a very, very optimistic plan, considering the time that the country was completely destroyed without industry, and that it was building itself together with the city, which of course then caused many changes by the time that were following the reforms of the political system that was all the time in the change. So this was the original scheme, but this is how it looks nowadays, more or less. And you could see how different the scheme they are. Almost 50% of the scheme have not been realized by the original idea, and this residential block that were actually quite diverse among themselves, because they have been the result of many architectural competitions, and they were built in the different time periods while the industry was growing, and provided kind of new possibilities for building. So again, it was very brave concept, and you see these heroic perspectives that were done by the end of 50s. And this is how it came out today. So instead of really rigorous plan, actually the time brings the changes, not only in architecture styles, but also in the whole conditions that condition the architectural styles, in the culture of building, in the economy, in the political stances, which actually make the city that is usually built in the long-term period very diverse and heterogenic. And this, for example, this church on the left that looks the oldest buildings is actually the newest one because of these recent political changes. And about this building, it's very interesting because that was the tower was the building of Communist Party built in the 50s at the headquarters of the Communist Party of Yugoslavia. Then it was heavily bombed during the NATO bombardment in 1999. And then it was sold as a ruin to a private investor who dressed it up in the new facade, this glass curtain facade, and then add the shopping mall in front of it. So this is very far away from the origin, and the time span is, maybe just like 60 years. How the whole idea about the city and what should be built in it changed, and how it defines our lives afterwards, together with that. And just as a small digression, what happened in the 90s was particularly strong because during the war and the crisis that were in Serbia, gray economy boosted up a lot of illegal building that took many different shapes. And one of these shapes was this kind of attachment to the modern structure, or on side or on the roofs. And this is just small examples of 5 million attachments that were built in whole Serbia during the period of about 15 years, which triggered actually my interest towards the informality and informal architecture as a way of massive building change that would happen. So when you look the center of New Belgrade, it looks like this nowadays. It's when you look at this, if you remember the maquette from the beginning, that's really strange. So the ideal concept of the functional city actually become something else. And this is really interesting for me because it really affects the way how we think about building the city and how we think about engaging time within our process of design, because this is something that is very out of schools and out of practice, I would say, since the many years and since the centuries, because we believe that what we build is timeless. And everything, all the tools that we use are based on this idea of timelessness. So this is something that influenced me to think about how we can actually think about building the city with the concept of change, inherited change, which is always there, which is following the time, and what kind of tools we need to be able to anticipate the future changes that we cannot understand at the moment when we are making plans or making design for the city. And for that reason, I start to experiment and to look for another alternative way of designing architecture and designing and making urban design. For me, just to mention, it doesn't make much difference because once you start thinking about time and then you come to the theory of complexity, and then everything that is drawn out of it is basically become a relational system. A relational system is always open-ended and it's kind of changing by itself, because the relations between the things that are included in the system are open-ended and changeable. So the things you design are not defined by the scale, but by the complexity of these relationships. And for that reason, it doesn't matter if you are designing a city or designing the whole territory, or you're doing a furniture design, or or any detail in architecture design. It's if you think through a relational system, the scale, it's really irrelevant, becomes irrelevant. So if I talk now about city, it's also related to any kind of design we can do. So to go back to the history, my instead of ideal city and ideal design, I would actually start the lecture with this kind of image of ruined Babylon Tower. And if you know, it's an old myth coming from the Bible that when the humans wanted to reach the God, and then they decided to build the tower that they will reach as high as possible towards the God. But then to prevent from that thing, the God decided to give them different languages so they couldn't understand each other, so they couldn't agree how to complete the building, and the building stayed ruined forever. So if you think about different languages, any kind of difference is actually included into this, and any kind of differences actually prevent us from reaching the ideals. And but then you have to think, how to manage these differences, which is something that is given to you. And this is especially important now, today, when we have all these converging crises coming, that we are all aware, and that are affecting architecture a lot. So we have a financial crisis, we have a health crisis, we have political crisis, we have economic crisis, architecture crisis, mental crisis. So somehow in the last 5 years or something, they affect globally every country and every individual that is living, and also architecture as a profession. And it opened this kind of field of uncertainty in front of us, which in some people feel very uncomfortable, and they start to panic, and they are looking for certainty, usually in the very wrong places, looking at them in this timeless, permanent protection, which could be found in the myths or in the ideals again. And on the other hand, it gives an opportunity for those who are within, who recognize complexity, to think about alternative way of coming out and imagine future differently. And this is the moment when I now want to go back to our studio in Dessau, where I used to teach for the last 12 years. And it was a thesis studio. So just to say something about the school, it's it was a small school. It's practically a master course of 2 years in English. And it had about 100 students every year. So about 200 students in 2 years. And students came from more than 50, 60 different countries, most of them from the developing world. And all those students are already finished their education, architecture education in their countries, most of them, and have also professional experience. So they're technically pretty educated already, and even ready to work in Germany without having to go through these 2 years. And I used this opportunity actually to create a thesis studio as a laboratory where we could experiment with these alternative visions that are related to the opportunities of the future within this kind of complex situations that we are all in. And that is kind of not usual for the architecture school. So I know that all the students have been pretty much confused at the beginning until they get into the system and then discover their own place and possibilities, because the system is an open system. So basically they could work on it individually. And that's how I actually choose those students. All those who found their own ways were actually the best students that I could work with. And that's why I also consider the thesis studio not as a kind of one-way learning where you have authority of the professor who is telling students what should they do, but as a kind of exchange of experiences and research that we are all looking for answers, in which we are all looking for an answer. So I have a kind of dialogue as a main principle of teaching, and differential learning as a methodology that is applied in all these 12 years. Also, we speak very different languages, and we, like these people who built the Babylon, wanted to build the Babylon Tower. And that was very interesting to actually, it became really a global situation. So it helped us a lot to understand the world differently so that we could change it. And how to change the world, you change it, you have to change your mind, change your ideas, your habits, your path, your goals, your possibilities. So how to do that in 1 year, and in the same time doing that through the designing the architecture. You know, that's a big trick. So for that you need a special method, and I somehow managed to compile the fragments of this alternative teaching that I applied before in Belgrade into a system, research and design system, that was then offered to the students to get into it. And I would just tell a little bit about it, so because I want to speak more about the outcomes than about myself. So the first thing that I decided is to create a kind of utopian horizon, a new utopian horizon, because we need to get out of this situation. We need to innovate our instruments, and we need to innovate our visions of the future to get out. It's a similar thing like the modernist architecture did at the beginning of 20th century, 100 years ago, you know, when they were imagining the future based on the context which they have at that time. Today we have a completely different context, but based on that context, they were actually developing a new models of life, even if nobody asked them, and even if that was completely detached from the practice of that time and completely detached from the public that actually didn't accept it, was considered as an avant-garde. So I was thinking, what could be the avant-garde today, and how you create related to the development of alternatives that exist in the technology, in economy, in politics, how you create a new utopian horizon, not as an idea that should be reached, but as a method that you use to innovate. You know, so it's a different use of the utopia than before. So this utopian horizon consists of sustainable urbanity, of the idea of environmentalism, of bio-cyber tech, shared economy, politics of care, collaborative society, post-human humanism, for C&C education, design as future making. You know, so now we're not going to get into each of these. It will take several lectures to explain behind these concepts, you know, so let's keep it like that, and let's see how this came alive through the projects that students used to do. So in order to proceed with the transformation, I needed some kind of criteria that control the sustainability of this transformation process. And I found them in a Felix Guattari book, Three Ecologies, in which he underlined the social, mental, and physical ecology as the main concepts of something which is called ecosophy, a new philosophy of relational living, of environmental living. And again, very short, for me, the mental ecology, when you translate it to the architectural world, means the questioning of, the permanent questioning of our perception and interpretation that we have to permanently roll in a way, which means it's always open-ended. We're never stuck to certain principles and follow only that. We need to observe and question every time we observe what it is. And there is our mental curiosity, which actually help us and push us into this drive. We usually forget about it once we start working in the architecture office. Then social ecology means it's actually underlined the collaboration as a main ethical principle, and physical ecology is emphasizing this how you say, environmental design principles like reusing, renewing, rewilding as the main architectural concepts that we have to question again, not just apply as such. And then again, very shortly about the tools that I offer the students to deal with the complexity and to deal with the future instead of usual form function tools that we are trained to use it. And it took me a long time for myself to understand how these tools may work and where is their position with this new field. So I actually use diagrams because the diagrams are the most unreducible instruments for dealing with complexity. They're in a very simple way a system of relationships where elements are connected among themselves. And I tell you the relationships are changeable, so you have a number of elements with a number of changes. So they create a really complex system. And here you can see the program diagram, which we start off after the site analysis and actor analysis. So in this program diagram, you actually anticipate the change by envisioning what kind of actions and attributes would happen in that future space that you want to design. And actions doesn't include only human, but also non-human species that appear within this realm of the site that you are kind of framing when you start working on. From the program diagram, you develop a spatial diagram, which again create a kind of facilitate the activities and attributes which are there in a very abstract way, I would say. And from the spatial diagram, you come to the architectural diagram, which then gives you the basic element of architectural language that you further need to develop in the further design process. So I think these are the core instruments that I ask in each studio, no matter what theme we've been doing, to deal with. And this actually helps us to come to the very particular projects that now I want to show you. They're all related to the different aspects of time within the space, and there are different kind of relationships. So this first one is called temporary state of order, and it's happening in Islamabad, the new capital of Pakistan. which was one of this modern city start to be built up by the end of 50s, 60s. So, and it's planned as any modern city very functionally. So it has these big squares of 2 by 2 kilometers, which were filled up with residences and other buildings, but they were not all managed to fill up yet. So a lot of informalities start to grow next to this, using these unbuilt squares next to the built ones, so that because like any city, you need services, and all the service laborers were actually live within very informal condition. So this work was done by Anam Tariq, and she actually wanted to follow one of the everyday path of these servant ladies who work in this organized part of the city, and every day she comes from formal city and back. And during the movement through this informal part, she create her existential map, and this existential map, like in this mental mapping process, is usually marked, signed with certain kind of meanings, which are kind of very individual, because the informal realm is pretty non-hierarchical and very hard to understand from the way of the outsiders, and even the insiders need to develop a special existential map to be able to move through it, to understand how to live within such an environment. Starting from these meanings, she actually developed a whole new program diagram, which is this one, in which these meanings are abstracted in a way to create a special procession that will give a higher meaning to this mundane everyday walk. And now we are into the spatial diagram, where each of these moments within this procession became spatially signified and symbolic for a certain kind of existential moment, an existential trauma or existential hope that is again giving special meaning to this very basic life. And then all of this together create this spatial diagram, which is actually transformed into altogether, when you put into a kind of a temporary structure, architectural structure that serve annually for the certain procession. And by doing that, this structure becomes this certain core of this informal part of the city, giving certain kind of meanings to all these lost meanings that actually the city doesn't have. So this annual event, like in the old time, when you have all these processions and festivals and moments when people transcend themselves to the higher level of life, actually is something that is giving a permanent emergent meaning to this informal part of the city. And that looks something like that in the architectural diagram. And it combines static with dynamic elements, and it combines many features of architecture that we know and that we do not know. But as I said, this is just a temporary scenography, which actually gives higher meaning to the life. Another project, now we move to Dhaka in Bangladesh, a couple of 20 million people city, permanent state of emergence. So it's a city which is growing exponentially in the last decades, and especially on the periphery, which is kind of transforming by developers, and which usually happen in today this developing architecture is that you think only about certain programs like residences, but you never think about servicing these residences, and you never think about, because this is not so profitable, you know, and you never think about the circulation, the movement, and many things that actually make the city works. So the city, actually, this new city on the periphery, are left for themselves to find their way how they might work. So in this situation, we have an old market which is around this water body, which actually appear and disappear depending on the seasons. And in the rainy seasons, you have water. In the dry seasons, you lose it. So that market survived all this new development that were made around it, and it survived because it was the only source of servicing the trade and everyday goods that people need when they come to live somewhere, you know. So actually all the shops and the workshops that are around this market are the basic necessity, and they're usually never built together with the residences. So the market is needed as something that as a part of the city, and it is a very informal market because it was growing without the plans before, so it contrasts to the city around it. So by studying how this informality works, and this was done by Abrar Rafi, students from Dhaka, so he knows his city very well, he was actually able to find certain kind of informal patterns in building that that follows this kind of very dynamic market program, and alternation of the activities which are happening daily there. So his program diagram is basically not static, as you see on this picture. It's animated, and it's alternate different activities. And this alternation actually became the basic concept of his design, because while we were discussing it, we actually discovered that we cannot make the final image of this because of these constant changes, but we could actually explain the process of changes and animate the whole process as a vision that might happen in the future, so that each change actually improve the previous condition. But this market then has to be constantly changeable organism, so very, very lively place. And it also means that in an architectural sense that you don't have a kind of static objects that are completed and that are perfect, you know, but you actually use all kind of these flexible, I would say, platforms and construction systems that enable, that can follow these daily changes and be composed and decomposed depending on the activities, which are very dynamic, as I told you there. So at the end, I would say there is no final picture, but the process which is unfolding. And of course, like any process, is actually growing by the time. So it is improving itself and redesigning itself on a daily basis. And these are some scenes of this kind of very strange hybrid of the construction site and the market, which kind become a new model for dealing with this special emergent situation, a permanent emergency, I would say. then again, emergent state of order. This project is from Jun Yong from Kuala Lumpur, who actually chose to do a site in Beijing in China, and it was an abandoned shopping mall, which was transformed into a vertical public park. So it's not an old building. It's the building built in the 80s, but it's already abandoned. So here is instead of shopping as a main activity that was defining the concept, she proposed sharing, which is this new utopian concept for organizing a public and then creating a public good. So you share basically any kind of activities, which means that even the trading actually could be substituted by sharing things. And for that reason, her main core of this new shopping mall is the library of things, in which people bring the things and other people take it. But if it constantly works, so you don't need to buy every time new things when something you miss, you can just come there and take it and then return it after a certain time. So again, this shopping mall as architecture was just made 2 atriums, and like a classical scheme of the shopping mall where you have corridors and the shops around completely close to the city around it. And then instead of this anti-program that she made was practically a sharing mall, which connect these 2 atriums into one valley, I would say. And all these platforms around it were freed from the shops and left as a kind of public space that people can use even for picnics. And then all additional services were stuck from the outside, so that it can connect much better to the city, because we need to draw in the public. This is how the library of things look like in connection of these 2 atriums. And this is from the top. When you go, you see the public space become larger, the library of things get smaller, and the attachments around it are servicing different kind of programs. Some are just connection, and some are common kitchens or shared toilet, or all kind of services that you can imagine. Again, library of things, a picnic place. And then we came to state of emerging order. You see, I'm playing with this emergency and setting up in a different position, because each of these projects treat it from different angle. And again, emergency is again a term that is taken from the complexity theory, and it's a very special term. I think I will have to write in the future more about this, because it's actually related in a philosophical sense to the idea of the constant becoming. So it's actually especially applicable to in the context of cities which are booming exponentially in this century, that are going out of control, basically, that is very impossible to govern in the old classical way, like we imagine ideal city, so. And we are in Cairo now, which is again 20 million city, where probably half of it is in what we call informal building, where are actually everybody do what they want, and all the services are in very weak level, and the state cannot do anything about it. They're not solving it. Actually, they're building new cities as far as possible from this kind of situation which is there. So they avoid dealing with the emergency. And emergency is really a thing that is marking, I would say, the architecture of the 21st century. So it is your project, Hossam, and it is, I really admire the way how you managed to proceed with it, especially during the lockdown that we had at the time when you were studying it. And we were meeting only online at that time. And I remember some of the studio meetings were going for like more than 10 hours, you know, following all the students. And it was very interesting time, but it's also give you a lot of time to deal with this in a special way. So what I can give you as a feedback, so what I see in your project as a kind of very special thing is this, the search for the patterns of informality, which are actually very difficult to trace because they are more into human behaviors than into architecture. Architecture become a consequence, you know, of these constant activities that are happening mostly in the public space, you know, because the private spaces are small and not so comfortable. So people live outside and they constantly exchange, sometimes through trading, sometimes through just chit-chatting, you know. So this is very hard to catch up and map. But it's not the only side. I think you managed then to abstract this kind of patterns with another set of patterns that were actually taken from Christopher Alexander studies of language of patterns, and then somehow to hybridize these two different approach, one which is very local and another one which is very generic in a way, because this was the idea of Christopher Alexander, into certain kind of patterns and activities that are very original, you know, and from that to take to read certain kind of organizational principles of emergency, I would say, which then actually resulted as a new concept of governance, how you actually manage this kind of periphery, which is left to the people to self-organize. And then it comes to the new typology of governance, which I think is very important for us to understand for the future, because as we know, informality is the most dominating building activity in the world, and it will take more and more people. Nevertheless, it's not in the focus of media and in the schools as well, but it is something that we have to accept as a fact, and also accept the fact that we as an architect don't have enough instruments to deal with this complexity. We need really to, and I think your work shows a possibility to think differently. So when you start thinking about what is the main organizational principle, it is the market again, and it is the public space where people can meet. So market is not about trading, it's about socializing as well. And it become the core of the whole system. All the rest is led to grow, following the same building principles that were already defined in the surrounding within this informal way in Cairo. So basically it's a primer skeleton in which you can then plug in different types of containers and then connect them with all possible kind of connections on trafficking, so that circulations become very easy going. Everything become very porous. and it's basically growing without ending. You know, it can go like this until it fills the last corner and probably go at the top of the other building. But this is the new parliament. It's the parliament of self-organized community. It's the new concept of emergency. And I think the architecture that represents it is very, it does it in a very proper way. Let's say it like that. So I learned a lot from this work. But then it reminded me of something when we were talking about the governance. And this is actually, I would say, one of the first urbanist scheme that talk about the governance, because we saw the concept of the ideal city, but that's a kind of a static object, you know. It doesn't say how it will build, who is building, what is doing. This is the allegory, which is the fresque in the small room next to the assembly hall in Siena, in Italy. And I think it's about 12th century or something like that. So it is allegory of, it's the city of Bongoverno and the city of bad governance. So you have good governance and bad governance on one side of the two sides of the room. And this room was serving as a kind of consultancy room, you know, among these representatives which were meeting in the city hall to come and discuss certain decisions about the city development, the city Siena in this case. So in the fresco of the good governance, it shows the city which is alive. You know, everything works. There is a festival. There are people on the street. There are shops are open, and it's a countryside around the city, which actually service the city and supply it with all kind of different products, not only agricultural also. So it's a kind of at that time like medieval city of art and craft and agriculture. And that is the image of the ideal city of the medieval time, you know, but it contained people and it contained the human behavior. On the other side, which I don't want to show you, is the same city if the governance is bad. And the bad governance means that all the shops are closed except the shop for armory. And the agriculture fields are deserted. So between those two walls, you know, you have to make decision to choose and to balance, you know, yourself, to create certain kind of ethical code, which will help you actually to develop the city further and to maintain the wealth that is already there and to transform it so that in the future it can bring even more wealth. And I think that's the first note about what does it mean to govern the city. And somehow it's set up aside, you know, it's not really, didn't play much role in the head, especially of the architects who are imagining these ideal cities all the time, you know, like hoping that somebody will understand their schemes and then they will build it just because they trust the authority of architecture. But it actually, the cities doesn't work like that. So this is one of the learning of the emergency, you know, the relations between the material resources, immaterial stimuli, and the human behavior is essential to organize any kind of existential space. But then we know that these relations are changeable if we know that, and they, with the time, they bring novelties always because the conditions are changing, the materials resources are changing, and the stimuli are changing on a daily basis. Then we have to think about governing the city in a completely other way. So I want to show you another project from Aida Rosti from Malaysia, that this project was done in a period on one of the German elections, when for the 6 months they couldn't agree about who is, what kind of coalition they should make for the parliament. And the building is the German parliament, which, you know, has a long history of demolishing and rebuilding. So this is the latest idea of how it could be rebuilt in case this new concept of liquid democracy is applied, or liquid or direct democracy, you know, which is actually not such a long term. You know, it's possible to organize it. It's just politically, it's technically it's possible. Politically, it questions all the power of the political elite, so it will probably never be realized. But in case it realized, you don't need anymore this central assembly where your delegates would meet, because you are not having a delegates, basically. It's in direct democracy, you are deciding without delegation. You're really about each question. And it's completely another kind of political system, which then reflect to the organization of the city, which, as I said, the city is in the permanent condition of emergency, which means it's need a new type of governance to be able to develop itself. And these governments need a new type of spaces that will facilitate the process of direct democracy. And this is what's happening in this project. So instead of this central hall, you have many caverns that serve for just very occasional meeting of diverse group of peoples. So it become a very porous and kind of informal building itself, I would say, at the end. That then has to take care about the city that looks like that in the future. This is the project of Ruslana from Russia, who actually did this project during the lockdown that caught her in Ecuador, where she was visiting her boyfriend, and she couldn't move from this kind of new, strange place where she was tucked in together with the family of the boyfriend. And she started drawing and drawing and drawing, hand drawing. But actually, this hand drawing were related to the very important future question of how technology would merge with humans, and how this cyber world, virtual world, would actually become so unidentified with this reality that we used to have, especially also the urban reality. So how you would imagine the governing of the city, which, as I said, grow uncertainly, but it's also in everyday thing, you can hardly recognize what is the fact and what is the virtual fact. So no, it's not strange that we go back to the ideal city, because that seemed like a rescue belt in this kind of complexity that we were living in. But actually, I believe that there is a way, architecture way to deal with this. And this project is showing that. It's a very complex project to elaborate and explain, but it's basically trying to tell you that in the future, the city will not be read as we used to read it today through a certain kind of morphology and functions and so, but through the nodes. And these nodes are a meaningful node that are actually compiling both worlds, virtual and real worlds, into one. And the meanings are changing from individual to individual. So it's super difficult to follow it as a one image, but as a system, you need to understand. And of course, for understanding this type of environment, you need a new kind of education, even from the elementary school, and not to say about university. So at the end, this new type of governance will deal with this new type of environment, and it will be very difficult for us to keep the old type of understanding and the old type of designing the city and as we usually. So we have really to change our mind and to change our habits to be able to deal with something that is future. And this is another, one of this, I want to finish with these most edgy projects. This is Aslikan Dökmeci from Turkey, who actually wanted to understand how this hybrid human that will appear, which is the android, so it's a kind of humanoid robot, let's call it like that, how he will find a home in this type of the city. And once we understand the home of the android, we can also understand the home of us, because by the time we will also be changed with the effect of all this technology that is we are applying even without being conscious of it, with AI and with maybe biochip in the next years and so on. So that will change our idea of existence and our idea of existential space for sure. Yeah. So if I think about students that I need to educate, that will live another generation, another 30 years like I live, and in professional sense. And then I have to tell them, what they will have to learn for these 30 years. It's almost impossible to predict, what would be the demanding knowledge. But if we start with complexity, and then it's an open system, which means you have to learn all the time, basically, on a daily basis to be able to navigate through this. Then I have to give you a certain kind of instruments so that you can start with dealing with, so that you can proceed in the future. And concerning myself, for example, I couldn't imagine computers when I was finishing my study. They didn't exist. When they appeared, they were on the tables of the secretary. They serve as a telephone book, the first ones. In the 90s, the first AutoCAD looks as clumsy as AI 2 years ago, not today. Today they're already, but it was super clumsy in a DOS. So you have to write each command, in a special language, using special characters. And it took 5 years until it becomes everyday applicable things. And now you cannot imagine an architecture studio without it. Then I couldn't imagine internet even. I couldn't imagine. Android phones. These touchscreen phones. I couldn't imagine AI for sure, even 5 years ago. So you have to design for the world you cannot imagine. That's a tricky thing, and you cannot use this old-fashioned form function things or concept of ideal city. It doesn't work anymore like that. So let's come back to this idea of the home. So she actually projected herself into Eve, which is the humanoid female robot, who want to find the house in Berlin, in the center of Berlin. And this is the program diagram explaining, all the activities related to the basic existential things only. So without any upgrade, this is just what does it mean living in the house? What kind of activities? That we do, maybe I told you once, more than 2,000 decisions per day, every day, super complex. And then, we are aware maybe of 10 of them. So But as an architect, you have to be aware of all these 2000. Even the daily things, normal daily things. When do I wake up? What do I see when I wake up? When I open my eyes? Starting from there, and not to say, how do I open the fridge? These are the banal things. So once you come to more abstract things, you have 10,000 activities and attributes. This is the spatial diagram, just to remind you, and this is the architectural diagram of that house. It doesn't look like any house we know. But this is something we need to understand. And in order to do that, we need to develop ability to trust on certain things beyond our own control. So what kind of architecture instruments we need for that? With AI, we can get something like this. This is also from one of the projects taken in the latest years. So this is a city in which most of the services are online. So basically, the residence is exploding. They need to enlarge because people work from home, and the public space becomes everywhere. That was the idea. Or we go into this direction, which is kind of merging bioculture with residential culture, which is also possible. So you have that as a possibility, but you also have this as a possibility, which I think, to come back to the hyper-real world, I want to recall one of my old projects from Belgrade that I did before coming to DESO, which is the establishment of the School of Urban Practices, where I took my studio from the university outside in the city in one pretty neglected quarter. And we found a space where the students could actually work, talk with the residents around, with the community, and based on these interviews, conversation, and meeting, build in real time some small interventions that would help this residency to improve their public life. I think these both things are equal and very important to think about when you think about the future design and when you think about the city of changes. And we have to be able to switch from one another any time. We have to learn how to talk as an architect with the real people, not the people we imagine as the universal one, and to do these hands-on intervention buildings in the city that is collapsing. And then to keep on learning without professor. So with this, I want to finish our lecture. We can talk if you want.
Thank you so much, Ivan. Thank you for this impressive lecture. I really was excited listening to you, listening to the ideas, and how actually this line of thought that you brought from your first experiments in Belgrade and actually in a city that are undergoing so much changes in this years, and how you brought this actually into this academic world with so many different students who come from different cultures, and you frame it in a very interesting way. I rather have some question that you can also answer, and it's a quite difficult question actually, and I know for sure that you have a big impact on students during this time of studies in master studio. What advice actually you have as to give for students, including myself, to keep on going, developing this line of thought, especially within uncertainty and the system that we live in, because we also work, we have to maintain our life. how to keep exactly this going?
Yeah, well, you have to find a way to keep on learning. You know, I think that's the most important thing. And learning not in the sense that you enlarge the quantity of the same things that you are already doing, you know, going from one project to another, and then you say, okay, this is a new experience and a new experience, you know. But learning for me means growing mind, you know, changing your mind all the time. So it means also re-questioning to everything you know already, and finding the way, the new ways of thinking, and finding the new ways of doing. And, you know, and of course, you know, this is conditioned all the time. You know, you're not living in the isolated world. So these changes happen if you are in the, if you're listening the rhythm of the world, I would say, you know, the changes of the world. Because the world itself, it's because it has so many actors involved, you know, it's changing all the time. So once you get attuned to these changes, then it takes you also to change all the time. And you can do it even in the most difficult situation, you know, if even in the prison, you know, but, you know, you can do it also while you are working in the architecture office, most of the time, very commercial projects, you know, that was, it's harder, you know, because it doesn't give you a lot of time. But, you know, since the world is changing negatively lately, you know, the crises are always good moments, because the crises themselves questions the status quo, the business as usual, which is going on in the architecture industry. Let's call it like that. And they brings you an opportunity, you know, to try out the alternative things. I think like this because all my life was, professional life was happening because during the crisis, different type of crisis that first happened in my country, and then, you know, now they're becoming global, but it's actually it's never coming out. So it was not ideal situation. There were very difficult moments, you know, that happenings, even the years, you know, very difficult. But that helps you to keep keep growing, you know, and keep changing and keep learning. And if I can give you any advice, is that never stop learning. You know, and then again, learning means changing. And there are now many new things. Technology brings daily new things to learn. You know? Even if you feel very isolated and far away because of these connections that we have, you know. So and internet that we are all in, you know, everything becomes much more reachable than before. You know, when I was studying, I had to wait 3 months to get a book that I want to read. You know, now you can find it in 1 minute. You know, that's different things. Now, if you get into this AI world, you know, you will find a lot of different ways how you can use it. It's not an instant machine that gives you a espresso coffee. You know, it's a kind of it's a world for itself. You know, that needs to be examined. So you always have to find. It's again, I'm maybe lucky because I kept my curiosity of a child. You know, so I'm really interested in all these things. But I don't know, those people who lost during the education the curiosity, they should revive that in themselves. I think it's very important.
Thank you so much. And I think we will have another lecture after the book will be published.
Okay.
And thank you so much again, even for the time and for this interesting lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose.